right, we'd like to welcome Patrick Cantlay to the interview room here at the Arnold Palmer Invitational 2023. Thanks for joining us for a few minutes, Patrick. Just wanted to get you started. This is your first start here at Bay Hill. I don't know if you've ever played at Bay Hill before this in any junior events. If you have, what are your thoughts on the golf course?
Yeah, I played the AJGA. I can't remember what tournament it was, but I played a tournament here when I was maybe 15 or 16 years old. And it's set up much different this week than it was then. Golf course looks like it's going to be tough, and with the weather we have, I'm sure it'll be very tough.
And I was just talking to you as we came on here, and you said you met Mr. Palmer a while ago when you played in the Palmer Cup. I know it wasn't here, but what was that experience like, and what did you take from that first meeting with him?
Yeah, it was at the Palmer Cup after my freshman year of college, and he, I thought it was impressive that he was there at the event. Obviously, the event had been run a number of years, but it seems like he went to at least all the American ones, and so I just heard many stories about what a class act he was, and that day was no different.
And just you've had, this is your sixth start this season, a couple of top 5 finishes early on. How would you kind of assess your season going into this Florida swing now?
Yeah, off to a little slow start, but hopefully catching some momentum after Riviera, and really looking forward to basically a bunch of big events coming up this spring.
All right, we'll take some questions. If you have a question for Patrick, just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you, and we'll start in the front with Doug.
Do you still have that trophy from that AJGA event?
Well, I didn't win.
Oh, didn't want to bring that up. Some details are starting to come out. You've been a strong voice in kind of this future. I just wanted to get your opinion on the value of not having a cut. What are the pros and cons, and how do you think you guys got to that decision?
Yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, I think they're really exciting changes, and I think they'll make the tour stronger going forward. And I think as it pertains to no cut, I think it'd be, the biggest advantage of it is locking in the stars that play those events into 4 days. So if you're a little kid in whatever city that one of these tournaments is going on, LA for example, and you can only go on Sunday for sports, or that's when your mom or dad can take you, you know that if Tiger Woods enters the tournament on Sunday, you can go watch him. Rory, you can go watch him. And I think that's really powerful.
Is there any part of you that's excited about the pit being cut in half?
Well, it doubled this year and then went back to where it was.
Questions for Patrick? It's your big opportunity. We'll get a mic down to Mark in the front.
Hey, Patrick, you've had some pretty good runs yourself. We had Scotty in here a little bit a while ago, and he's had an amazing run the last 12 or 15 months. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to the dynamic of psychologically keeping that going? You're kind of, to some degree, in the middle of it now, even though you had a little bit of a slow start. But and how difficult is that to keep that momentum going? Because it is very cyclical, obviously.
Yeah, I think in golf it's very easy to be searching, even when you're playing really well, because you're always trying to get a little better. And I think sometimes you might have a very good process, and just doubling down on the process that's got you to where you are is the way that you get just a little bit better. And so I think we've seen over the years a few guys make radical changes even when they were at the top of their game, in an effort to try to get a little better at something that they weren't the best at. And not everybody has been able to pull that off. Sometimes guys have gone backwards when they do that. So I think, first off, knowing what's working and then continuing to do that is really the recipe for staying on a heater.
We'll go in the center here.
As an equipment free agent this year, I'm wondering if you've done any club testing, any recent switches, and how that process has been for you.
Yeah, I've done a little testing. In general, I'm not a big tester, but if something's better or potentially better, I'm now in a position where I can go out and put that in right away, and that's exciting. I really have only done some shaft changes this year. I experimented with some stuff in this off season and then at the beginning of this year. I thought maybe going heavier and everything would help me hit it a little straighter. I have been swinging the golf club just a little bit faster lately, and that's by design. I think it's important to try and hit it farther these days. It's just the simplest, fastest way to get a little better. And so I noticed that the clubs or the shaft started to feel a little weak, and so I went to try and find what the right nudge into stiffer was, and I tried to go heavier with everything, from DG 120s to X100s, and then just 10 grams heavier in the same wood shafts. And the heavy change was really difficult for me to have similar feels. And so what I ended up doing was going back to the old weights, same shaft, and then tipping the wood shafts and hard stepping the iron shafts. And that's made a big difference in kind of just straightening out the ball flight, feeling like I don't have to guard against too big of a draw. And it's been easy, much easier than going heavier as far as the feels go.
Smart. Okay, go across to Ann on the right.
Hey, Patrick, can you talk about the positives for the non-elevated events in your mind?
Yeah, I think we're going to see now that the non-elevated events will most likely have stronger fields. I think you won't see any fields like you saw at Honda last week, because when you have 120 or 130 players all playing those designated events, they have to take a week off somewhere or they'll play 5 weeks in a row. So I think one of the real good changes with this is not only because the fields are limited, but there won't be as many designated events. And they were very cognizant of making sure that there weren't any weeks that would most likely have a bad field just because of their slot on the schedule. So I think the full field events will have much stronger and deeper fields throughout the course of the year.
Okay, we'll stay over this way, right behind Ann. Go ahead.
Hi, Patrick. You're a California guy who went to UCLA, and of course the U.S. Open is going to be at Los Angeles Country Club. Is this going to give you a unique comfort level, perhaps, for winning your first major? What are your thoughts?
I hope so. It's a very good golf course and only a couple miles from UCLA. I've played there a number of times, maybe 20 or 30 times, maybe more. And so I think it does. You know, anytime you've seen a golf course a number of times, you're more comfortable out there. And I'm really looking forward to it. We'll probably get great weather. It's Southern California in June, so they'll be able to set up the golf course however they want. And I'm sure that place will play fast and firm and difficult.
Go this way to Kathy.
I asked Max Homa this question, and he had a good answer, but he wasn't 100% certain what would happen. As you know, there are exemptions on the PGA Tour for winning majors, for winning the players. You had a 2-year exemption for a victory, or 2 or 3, depending on the tournament. What happens with those exemption categories and the designated events? It's kind of like 20 pounds of sugar and 10-pound bag. You know, are there going to be more people in the exemption categories than you can fit in the designated tournaments, or has the tour run stats on that? Max thought maybe it was going to have to do with FedEx points. I'm seeing some stuff in here that in a Golf Week story that I haven't digested yet. So I thought maybe
I'm not sure exactly your question. Could you ask it a little differently?
I'll try. There are 5 tournaments every year where if you win them, you're exempt for 5 years.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And so if you're exempt for 5 years,
I got it.
You're not, okay.
So I think what's really important here is not to conflate designated events with a tour card. So I imagine that those tour card exemptions will still apply, but you may not be into the designated events by way of that. Just because you're not in the designated events doesn't mean you may not be a full card-carrying member of the PGA Tour. Go ahead.
So you have track A, where you have a card, but you may not qualify for the elevated events, designated events, and you got track B where you do.
Well, I wouldn't even call them Track A and Track B. I would think of all the designated events as having a similar, but all having qualifying criteria. So just because you start the year not in the first designated event, if you play well, you'll be able to get into the next designated event. So it's not Track A or Track B necessarily. You could shuffle up or down into those tournaments or out of those tournaments even in the course of the year. But just because you're not in those tournaments, you could still be a full card-carrying PGA Tour member.
Okay, so it's just that exemption might not count for those particular designated events, depending on how you're playing.
Correct.
And in the past, it didn't matter how you were playing. You got into the events that you wanted to get into. Okay.
Right. It'll be more competitive to get into the best events on tour.
Okay, we'll go to Doug on the front here.
Assuming, do these changes happen without LIV? And if that's the case, what kept them from happening previously if this is the right direction to go?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in general, if a company or a product doesn't have competition, the incentive to innovate is low. And so now with competition, it makes everyone want to look inside to see how they could make their product better, how they could do things better. And I think the tour has done that. And I think this accomplishes that. I think it's going to make the tour stronger and put an emphasis on those weeks. And I think it's a really good storytell, and there'll be a ton of good storylines of people playing into the events and playing well, or people falling out of the events. And I think as you've seen with the designated events just this year, those tournament finishes have had amazing leaderboards and lots of really good golf. And I think we're going to see more and more of that.
Is there anything that didn't get accepted that you would have wanted to? Any change that didn't get adopted that you would have lobbied for?
I'm sure there were multiple.
Take three.
It's a collective effort, right? And so I think the main thing is trying to improve the product and make it better. And I think this does that.
And how do you think you would have accepted? It's kind of hypothetical, but when you came back at Pebble in Tampa, coming off your back injury and had limited status, would you have been as excited then as you might be now?
I'm sure I would have.
I'm asking you to speak for players who are now lower on the money list, if you will. Excuse me, FedEx Cup. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been extremely incentivized to play well to get into those events, and I think that's the great thing about this. If you get into these events, you get to play in the biggest, best events for the most amount of money, and anybody can play well and get into these tournaments.
Okay, we'll take one last one from Jeff in the middle.
Patrick, in this emerging designated, non-designated schedule, does it change the way you as a player set up your schedule? And have you, or do you foresee having to tell certain tournaments that you really like to play, I'm sorry, I can't do it anymore?
It definitely does. And I think you see this year, this is a tournament I've never played before. And I would say one of the main reasons I'm playing is because it is designated. And so, I mean, I don't know if there's tournaments that I love that I won't play. Like this year, I played Vegas. It's a tournament I've played well at. And so there will always be tournaments that myself and other top players view as, their favorites. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they continue to play those tournaments. The other nice thing is that the amount of designated events for next year is not overly burdensome. And so there will be plenty of available slots on guys' calendars to be able to play the tournaments that they love to play, even if they're not designated events.
So you see it more as an add than necessarily having to subtract?
Definitely. And, like I use Travelers as a good example. Incentives run the world, and Travelers puts on a wonderful golf tournament. And they've been able to attract a top world-class field, even though they're the week after the U.S. Open. So competition is good, and there's competition even among tournaments to attract the best players, and that's not changing.
All right, Patrick, we appreciate your time. Good luck this week, and everybody stay put. We've got Cameron Young coming in.
All right, thanks.